So Easter is here, and for people outside of Scandinavia, as usual, they will look upon some of our tradition and ask, what the hell are they doing? But don't worry, I am here to explain, and as usual, this will probably be a lot of the how is more important than the why. Since I am a Swede and actually isn't that knowledgeable about the rest of Scandinavians' Easter traditions, this will be mostly about how we do it in Sweden. So here we go. In Sweden and around Easter, you will start to see all kinds of bushes and bundles of sticks being decorated with feathers, colorful eggs, and sometimes little witches. Or rather, a cute version of a witch with freckles and a headscarf, shawls, and a little black kettle, sometimes with a little black cat. We also has the Easter bunny with eggs, and in some parts of Sweden we light up big bonfires. If we look at the official reason that we say we celebrate Easter today, we find ourselves in the land of Christianity and Judaism. According to the Christian Church, we celebrate Easter because that's when we remember Jesus' crucifixion and suffering, and then the resurrection on the last day. If you ask the Jewish community, this has an older tradition, and there is a celebration for the remembrance of when Moses was walking out of Egypt, leading his people away from slavery under the Pharaoh. It's not a big coincidence that these two big holidays are celebrated during the same time, because according to the Bible, Jesus was killed during the Easter Jewish celebration. But, okay, that's fine, but what the heck does all these eggs, hens, and feathers come from? And the Easter witch? And a bunny that lay egg? What does that has to do with either Jesus' suffering or the Jewish people walking out from the desert in the Promised Land? Was someone on drugs when they decided how to celebrate Easter? No, not really. As usual, this is a mix of all kinds of religion, traditions, and cultures. Here, there will probably be some people that want to make this into some kind of pre-Christian celebration and say that the Christian Church have stolen the real pagan Easter. Well, as I usually says, we actually don't know so much about that. And there are very few sources that can back this up. Part is to celebrate the end of the long dark winter and the coming of a brighter and warmer spring has happened in a lot of different cultures, pre-Christians as well as Christians. If this was something religious and have so much to do with what we do today, that is another question. There are sources that points towards that the blot was being done during the beginning of spring. But we do not know so much more about that than it was probably had. How? Don't know. When? Spring. That is about as close as we can come. And most likely it was around the equinox, since those kind of days usually marks as important in most cultures. Why a blot was held? Well, we do know that there was something called Disa blot that seemed to be around springtime. This was also the time when they held a big ting, or thing in English, which was a meeting where you could solve law disputes and where important political things happened. Diserna, where the name Disablot comes from, was a collective of female beings that was connected to Freya and childbirth. So they absolutely had something to do with fertility. So the Viking version of Easter was probably a celebration of life and fertility. And that is not so strange, since spring is when life comes back into nature, and as a farmer you start to plan for the part of the year when you grow and harvest things from earth. In Uppsala, even after we get Christianized, they continue to have a Disating long into the medieval times. But then it seems to have been moved back before the actual spring. Perhaps because then it didn't collide with the Christian Easter that moves around a bit in March and April. So why are we doing all these kinds of strange stuff? Okay, let me try and explain one at a time, and let's start with all the eggs and feathers and hens. One of the reasons for the explosions of eggs around Easter is that most years Easter usually collides with the time of the year when hens starts to up their production of eggs. During the Christian Lent, between Christmas and Easter, people was not supposed to eat eggs. And that meant when Lent stopped, they usually had a lot of eggs that needed to be eaten so they wasn't ruined. Hence, feast of eggs as much as you like. Eggs are also an old symbol of life. This is since long before Christianity, and this is not just for Scandinavia, this goes for a lot of different cultures. In older times, people gave egg to each other as a gift during Easter. In the southern part of Sweden, this was a game of flirting between men and women, where the men gave sweet semla buns to their love interest around Throw Tuesday, and the women answered with a basket of decorated pretty-looking eggs when Lent was. If you missed my video about the semla buns, you'll find a link in the description below. So egg seems to be one of those traditions that might stem from older pre-Christian traditions, or might not do it. It's really hard to decide. But it seems to be rather clear that when Lent was thrown into the mix, people, because of that, had loads of eggs when Easter came about. So it's not hard to see why eggs is so closely connected to Easter. The idea of painting them and decorating them has been around in Sweden at least since the 18th century. But today we have traded the real eggs for paper eggs that we fill with gifts and candy instead. So the bundle of sticks, decorated with feathers. Why do we take in pieces of sticks? This is one of those really weird traditions that had somewhere along the history stopped having a meaning and we just continue to do it. The how is more important than the why. The idea to bring these bundles of sticks into the house is not that old. Actually, not long ago it was considered to bring very bad luck to your house to take in any kind of sticks, because first of all, there was this idea about snakes could follow in with it, and you didn't want snakes in your house. And of course, this also meant that other supernatural forces could join the snakes and take place in your house. So then you bundled sticks together and you had it outside your house. But why take bundle of sticks at all? From the beginning, this was probably something that was done as a symbol of the palm leaf that was laid in front of Jesus when he entered Jerusalem. We don't have palm trees in Scandinavia. Duh. And actually trying to find anything with leaves after all those months of snow and freezing temperatures is rather impossible. So people kind of took what they had. Sticks. This is probably what then turned into a more dark and gruesome tradition. To whip each other during the Long Friday. Long Friday, the day when Jesus suffered and died on the cross, was called Whipping Friday in Sweden. And this was when the matron of the house was supposed to go out and fetch bundles of sticks, and then whip the children and servants, and then let her husband give her a good beating. This was charged with a lot of folklore magic, a way to really clean your household of sin. And if you wanted to do it the really right way, you choose thorns to do it with. Thorns because that is really painful, and because that was what Jesus was tormented with. In most parts of the country, this was supposed to be a pretend beating of each other. This bundle of stick was a playful way as a remembrance of Christ's suffering. This tradition is known since around the 17th century in Sweden. In some households that was of a stronger faith, they didn't actually pretend, and there the master of the house gave both wife, children, and all the servants a good beating with a bundle so they would know the suffering of Christ and also be able to be forgiven for their sins. Good old patriarchy. Because he, of course, didn't have to be beaten himself. As a man, he was, of course, perfect. Yes, this is me being a feminist again. And no, this was not seen by others as anything particularly strange, even if it might have been seen as a bit harsh. The right to beat your wife, children and servants as much as you felt they deserved it was not starting to be questioned until the 18th century. It was written into the law in Sweden, 1743, that a man was not allowed to beat his wife anymore. But to beat your servant was not forbidden until as late as around the middle of the 19th century, and to beat your own kids was questioned and tried to be outlawed in steps during the 20th century in the whole of Scandinavia and most of Europe, but the first real law came here in Sweden 1966. Finland followed the year after, and Norway 1972, with Denmark 1985. Iceland didn't put this in a real actual law until 2003. But, well, France, I am looking at you. Yes, you. That is the last country in Europe to take law action around child abuse and didn't make a complete law against child beatings until 2019. That's just horrible, guys. To go back to the bundle of sticks with happily coloured feathers on, they do have a bit of a dark history, as many things in the folk tradition has. But yeah, there you have it. It was from the beginning meant to be something that you either pretend to whip each other with or actually whip each other with. So what about all the witches? The cute little Easter witch we see today has not much to do with her origin. Again, a dark chapter in our history because of course this comes from the actual belief in witchcraft and witches and the horrible witch trials that was happening around the 17th century. The last week before Easter was called Dymmelveckan in Sweden. The word dymmel comes from a special wooden peg that was used during this week in the church bells instead of the normal metal one, making the church bell sound very low and hushed. That was just in the spirit of this week. This week you were supposed to be quiet and reflect on how life was hard and how Jesus had suffered and died. There was not supposed to be any loud work done, no chopping of woods or things like that. The last 3 days of Easter, starting on Thursday before Easter, skärtorsdagen in Swedish, the word skär stems from an old word that means to purify. Skärtorsdagen was believed to be a day when a huge fight between the good and evil forces took place. And the evil forces was strong during this night. Both Thursday and Friday before Easter have an old tradition of being days when you was not supposed to work, not even washing your clothes. If you did, you washed for the witches, it was said. These ideas had a strong influence on Sweden long into modern days. My own father, that never has been particularly Christian, was involved in the organization of a dance together with a Socialistic Democrat Party during this long and in their eyes rather boring day. This was done in the beginning of 1950s. The town's priest was extremely upset over this and had apparently made a huge fuss about it. So long into modern days, people have abided this tradition about skärtorsdag and långfredag, the Long Friday, and the eve of Easter as the 3 important nights where you should be quiet and not work. And that also meant that these 3 days of Easter was dangerous times because that's when all kinds of dangerous things was flying around, especially during the night. With the logic of folk magic, since Jesus was actually dead during this time, the forces of evil was his strongest. And one of the stories around Easter is that when Judas betrayed Jesus during the Thursday, all evil forces in the world were set loose. And that's why they have their own holiday to celebrate during Easter. The fear of witches and other evil forces during Easter has a long tradition in Scandinavia. Skärtorsdagen was the day for all witches to sneak off to Blåkulla or Häcklefjäll, imaginary places where the witches was believed to celebrate their own backward version of Easter, together with the devil. The real Christian Easter was silent, fasting before Easter day, so of course the witches had scandalous feasts that was allowed, where they gorged themselves on food, and the fast was actually supposed to be broken. And of course there was a lot of sex and orgies going on. Everything done backwards or upside down. Sometimes they also kidnapped children and brought them to these orgies. So far from the cute little witches we see today. To protect yourself against these evil beings, you lighted up bonfires, and when the silent week was over, you could make all kinds of noise to scare the evil forces away. There was banging on pots and pans, shooting with guns, or even fireworks. The tradition to dress up and go around making up mischief if you didn't give the people dressed up some booze or something to eat is a very old tradition, and we have had several of them the year around. Today, most of them have died out. The ones we still have are mostly the tradition of Lucia and Sankt Staffan in December, and the one about Easter witches, påskkärringar as we call them. Påsk because that is the Swedish word for Easter, and kärring because that is an old word for woman, and påskkärring actually means a witch. From the beginning, this was not done by children. This was done by teenagers and young adults. Around Easter, the guys dressed up as women and women dressed up as boys, and they had rather horrific looking masks or put soot in their faces, so no one would recognize them after they did all the pranks. When it turned from young people dressing up as witches and sometimes trolls that demanded booze and that made all kinds of pranks, to cute little children that walked around to beg for candy, that is a bit hazy, but it seemed to have started around the beginning of 20th century. This is still done to a certain amount today, even if I think this might be a tradition that is on the dying side. As I have mentioned before, tradition changes and gets renewed due to a lot of reasons. And even if we have a tendency to reason that the how is more important than the why up here in Scandinavia, sometimes the why is so weak, so the how doesn't no longer feel logic. And our world changes nowadays, so perhaps the party Halloween has taken over the tradition of going around begging for treats. I must admit that this is only my own guessing. I just have noticed that it has been less and less cute kids at my door during Easter the last 10 or 15 years or so. Of course, it doesn't help the little Easter witches that nowadays there's a lot of locked doors to even get into the apartment buildings, and that is much harder to go around the houses like I did when I was a kid. The Easter Bunny then. Well, yet again, this is something that people like to find an old and pre-Christian root for, something that has transformed in some way onto becoming a children's play today. But there are very few evidence of that. Actually, the first time we see the Easter Bunny is in Germany, and there is actually already then mentioned as a thing that was made up by adults as a way of playing with the kids. It's a bit like Santa Claus. It was a bit of a laugh and silliness that you did this as an adult, tricking your kids to believe in the Easter Bunny, and it came to Sweden around the 19th century. Before that we had an Easter rooster. Not that much more logic, since I don't know any roosters that can lay eggs, but the rooster has a bit more connection to the Easter legend around Jesus. When the rooster call, and 3 times you will deny me. In Christianity, the rooster therefore is a symbol of Jesus' resurrection and light conquering over darkness. Since the roosters like to sit and plague everyone trying to sleep in early mornings, yes, I am bitter about my teenage life as being a neighbor to my mother's hens sometimes. Well, this is not a strange thing to have a rooster as a kind of a watcher over the daybreak, when the daylight conquers the darkness of the night. But still, even with this information, it is a rather loose connection towards that this has anything to do with either Christianity nor older pre-Christian tradition. The Easter Bunny and the Easter Rooster are just fun characters that adults have made up as an excuse for hiding eggs for the kids. From the beginning it was real eggs, and later on it turned into chocolate eggs and other types of candy or gifts. So that was a bit about Swedish Easter tradition. I bet that you recognize some of them as your own, even if you don't live in Sweden. But now you hopefully know a bit about where they come from. As usually, I say that you can celebrate your holidays just as you like to, and I do hope that you had a great Easter weekend and that you ate so much candy that you felt sick. I know I did. Until next time, stay safe and healthy and take care of yourself and your family. Happy Easter!